Welcome, welcome again, everyone. So this is the second talk on the first noble truth of the Four Noble Truths, as taught by the Buddha. So the first talk dealt with kind of intellectually or logically understanding the truth of suffering, that part of being human, part of this human existence involves a level of pain and difficulties in our lives, unavoidable suffering, and also this is the extra suffering that we create for ourselves in our mind and how we react to the unavoidable suffering. So we kind of, the first talk was really exploring this, getting this kind of, excuse me, this logical, cognitive, discursive idea of the truth of this. Like, because you can kind of see it. It's one of these truths that you can see, that there's pain that arises in the body, aging happens, illness happens, and you can logically see that is unavoidable and is part of being human. So that's the first way to approach this this first noble truth. The second way to approach the first noble truth is to getting the felt sense of it in your direct experience. And this is often what we talk about in insight meditation dharma circles, is getting to your direct experience and getting the felt sense of these teachings. And we probably say that because we emphasize that, I should say, and not the intellectual knowing, because I think many of us are pretty good at finding books and and getting a pretty good sense of some of these teachings intellectually. But that's an important part of these teachings. Having said that, in fact, each of the Four Noble Truths has three insights, and the first insight for each one is knowing it and understanding it at an intellectual, cognitive level. The second is penetrating it, and by penetrating it is seeing it in your direct experience. And the third level is integrating it into your life, or taking that knowing and practicing that knowing and how you actually live your life. So we'll see if we can get sort of the second and third, the penetrating it through, reflecting on it in our direct experience, and the knowing of it and integrating it into our life. Ajahn Chah said there are two kinds of suffering: the suffering that leads to more suffering, and the suffering that leads to the end of suffering. There are two kinds of suffering: the suffering that leads to more suffering, and the suffering that leads to the end of suffering. So the Four Noble Truths are really pointing us into the direction of relating to the pain and difficulties, the dukkha in our lives, in such a way that it transforms us in such a way that it is the end of suffering, or the cessation of suffering. So if you deny or run away from the pain and difficulties in your life, or you will spin more suffering. If you open and allow it and meet it, then you can be transformed by it. So that's really what these truths are basically pointing to. So you're recognizing the suchness, as the Buddha said, of the moment. By suchness, it's this is how it is in this moment. And you embrace the unavoidable reality of being a human being. as I've often said, the 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. You embrace the whole lot of it. There's a story of Kisa Gotami. Some of you may have heard this story. Kisa was a young woman from a wealthy family who was happily married to an important merchant. When her only son was 1 year old, he fell ill and died suddenly. Kisa was struck with grief. She could not bear the death of her only child. Weeping and groaning, she took her dead baby in her arms and went from house to house, begging all the people in the town for news of a way to bring her son back to life. Of course, nobody could help her, but Kisa would not give up. Finally, she came across a Buddhist who advised her to go and see the Buddha himself. When she carried the dead child to the Buddha and told her story, he listened with patience and compassion, then said to her, Kisa, there is only one way to solve your problem. Go and find me 4 or 5 mustard seeds from any family in which there has never been a death. Kisa was filled with hope and set off straight away to find such a household. But very soon she discovered that every family she visited had experienced the death of one person or another. At last she understood what the Buddha had wanted her to find out for herself, that suffering is a part of life and death comes to us all. Once Kisa accepted the fact that death is inevitable, she could relate wisely to her grieving. She took the child's body away and later returned to the Buddha to become one of his followers. But stories, directly pointing at this knowing of the truth of human existence. In this case, knowing that death comes to us all, and the grieving around death is experienced by everybody, every household, every community. So there's the logical recognition of dukkha. So it's a very simple teaching, but in many ways a very deep teaching, I find. So the Buddha called suffering a tangle. I don't know if you've come across that term, tangle. Tangle. It's a complex of physical and emotional stimuli registering in the brain. So you can almost picture this tangle. Sometimes refer to it as a knot that needs to be undone. And to penetrate suffering, we kind of untangle this tangle. And that's like really the process that we go through in this practice, is we slowly untangle the tangle that the Buddha was referring, or we slowly untie this knot. Because if we keep looking with the same diluted lens, we'll never see differently. We'll just, if we don't have a shift in perception, we'll just keep perceiving things the same way. And this is really what the Buddha is pointing to when he talks about right view, shifting our perception to know suffering's true nature. And to do so, we can live directly with it as a lived physical experience. We can get to know it at a very real level. As those that were here last week know, I was just heading out for a canoe camping trip. And in fact, I just got back this morning, so I'm a little tired. Just got finished kind of unpacking the barrel and the big pack and so on. And the canoe camping trip is a great way to explore dukkha and how one relates to dukkha, because the saying that we've heard here before, anything can happen anytime, it holds very true on a canoe camping trip when you're in your 60s. And you don't quite have the strength and stamina, and even though your mind may think so, the body sort of doesn't go along perhaps at all times. So we had some experiences, and since I was, this as I always do, I try to live the teaching that we're experiencing here together. So, there were several opportunities, and I'll give you one that's an example of what we usually think of as dukkha, which is a difficulty or a pain, right? But also one that was experienced as a joy, because joy also causes suffering, depending on how we relate to it. So the difficulty one was, and this is a good one. This is a story I'll probably tell for the rest of my life, because it was a slow leak dukkha, you could say. So the first night, I blow up we sleep on an air mattress now that's, like this thick, no more Thermarest stuff. It's a full-on 8-inch, double bed that goes inside the tent. So I blow it up with this little machine, 4D battery machine, and it blows it all up nicely and it looks good. We go to bed in the evening and we both notice that it's slowly sinking. It's very slow kind of sink. And so we both kind of go, is this bed sinking? Oh yeah, I think there's a hole in this bed. Sure enough, a little more. So after about, I'd say an hour and a half, our butts are now touching the ground. So we've sunk, the heaviest parts are sinking to the ground. So we knew that, we were going to eventually be sleeping on the ground. There was no more 8-inch air mattress between us and the ground. And you could just see the mind, right? Can you imagine? The mind just starts to go with the stories, right? So there could be blame, could be fixing, the desire to fix, to all these different stories that the mind can spin that can create even more suffering out of this event. I kind of in my meditation later kind of figured there's probably three ways came to me that you could react or respond to this. One way is you could get up and start running around in the dark, trying to fix this. You bring the mattress out, and of course, you just get a flashlight and just go kind of berserk on it and try to find the leak in the dark and get even more upset and probably not sleep all night. Another way to relate to it could be to sense that the mind is spinning stories that is creating more suffering and wanting to get rid of those stories. So maybe, deep breathing, try and shut off the stories, right? Shut off all that dukkha that's being created by doing some meditative technique, some breathing technique, whatever it might be. That's the second way. The third way could be just to watch the stories arise and fade away with the realization, recognition that this is the egoic mind doing its thing. And this can just be seen and held and recognized by awareness. There's just stories arising. And that's part of what's happening in the moment. So you can see there are quite different ways. One is, let's say the first one is kind of a strong reaction. All right. And maybe some yelling at your partner about whose fault this might be and so on and so forth. The other one is, it seems like a meditation practice, right? You recognize that these stories are causing suffering. but there's an aversion to the fact that this is happening. You may even have the thought, I've been meditating for so many years, decades, whatever it might be. Why are these stories still, I've got to get they're rid of these stories. So there's an element of aversion to the fact that this is happening. Can you see that? And that happens to so many of us, that we don't think these stories, the mind should be doing what it's doing, causing this suffering. The third way is the mind's still doing the same thing, but there's just an acceptance that this is what the mind's doing. In other words, the thoughts aren't believed, and that there's no thought that we need to get rid of those thoughts, or at least if there is a thought that we need to get rid of those thoughts, it's not believed. Are you following me? You're not trying to get rid of anything. There's an acceptance of what's arising in the moment. And that's the ego mind may still spin these stories. If they're not believed, they don't create any ripples. They're just arising, arising, arising. I hope that's instructive, and I won't say which way either Vida or I responded to that. We did talk about it at quite at some length in terms of different ways that what arose, and then how it was related to. I can tell you, neither one of us jumped out of the tent and started running around screaming. But so yeah. So those are. And that might not be an uncommon way for, in fact, that thought arose in my mind that I should solve this right now, at whatever time it was. That thought did arise, but it wasn't a believed or thought in that moment. So that's dealing with the difficulty, and so that's really the crux of the practice. I hope you can really see the how that is what the practice is. And sometimes I feel like a broken record because I keep saying this over and over again about, accepting what's arising in the present moment. But as a practice, it means even accepting whatever the mind might be spinning as that's just okay. That's what minds do. We don't have to stop that. We just don't have to believe it. Just don't have to believe it. A thought is nothing in terms of, until it's believed. Of course, I'll take this story a bit further. The preference, of course, is to have an air mattress. That's why we brought it. So, got up in the morning, and I think about mid-morning, the practical mind kicked in, trying to figure out, first find out if it has a hole in it. Found the hole. I couldn't find it for the longest time, and then I thought, I was just sort of relaxed. I'll just relax here a bit, and I had my knees and my hands on. All of a sudden, I felt some air on my arm. I thought, okay, that's the hole. And I just followed the little, and then I found the hole, because that's the next practical mind again. How do I plug that hole? So it's not like I accepted the fact that we didn't have a mattress for 4 nights and just slept on the ground. Although I did quite enjoy sleeping on the ground. Vida did not. There was no way she was sleeping on the ground, but I kind of found it kind of comfortable. She said, next time I'll bring a single mattress and then I can sleep on the ground. And but so that's so the practical mind was still used, right? So those thoughts are, and we've talked about this, how the mind is still a tool. Doesn't mean we just don't try to solve these kinds of issues. The other event So Crotch Lake is this beautiful lake with no cottages on it. It's all pristine woods and rock. And we were going along, and it was just breathtakingly beautiful. And those moments where the mind and the heart just take in a beautiful scene, the peacefulness. There wasn't a sound of anything, no wind, just peace. The mind took that in, the heart, and what happened then? The mind started going, you need to make sure you do more of this, and starts planning. You need to make sure you get this equipment and this equipment so that Vida will want to do this in the future. And you need to, it started going into and then I felt all this tension. I thought, wow, that just happened like that. It was seconds. It actually happened faster than my explaining of it. And noticing how dukkha can arise from this grasping of the pleasant. And not enjoying the moment is rather like, that could have gone on and spun out into all kinds of thinking, and I would have lost any presence with the beauty of the moment. So there's two ways, the dukkha can arise from the pleasant, how we relate to the pleasant and how we relate to the unpleasant. And how it really, the practice is continuously noticing how we are responding or reacting to each of those moments, to every moment. So it's that moment by moment awareness is so important. A quote from Lama Suradas. I've quoted him before. He's a Dogen teacher, direct path teacher. Often when I talk about the direct path, I may be referring to some of the teachings that I've resonated with Lama Suradas. He said, how much we suffer depends on us, our internal development and our spiritual understanding. Our pain and suffering point out to us where we are most attached to ourselves. I'll say that again. Our pain and suffering point out to us where we are most attached to ourselves. Our body, for example, or our loved ones. It shows us that what we are holding on to the most. By recognizing this, we can learn to use loss and suffering in ways that help us grow wiser and become at peace with ourselves and the universe. I've got a little comic here. I don't know who it is. I can't see the little writing. Looks like it's a little yellow dog and a person, if you might know that comic. I don't really read comics a lot, but the guy is saying to his dog, life is like a bowl of cherries. And the dog says, how so? I hate cherries. Well, I found that funny anyway. So to be with, the practice is to be with this, the cherries that you don't like, with that kind of non-judgmental, accepting attitude. So not being in contention with the moment. Again, I sometimes feel like a broken record. This is the teaching, right? We're being with what's arising moment by moment, without contention, without friction, without struggle. And this leads to clear seeing. And then through clear seeing arises wise action. So this practice is, I wish I could say things in a way that would that you could see that this is the most important thing you could do in your life, is to be in non-contention with the moment. And that this is it. This is the peace and freedom that pretty much all the spiritual mystics and masters from every tradition spoke about. Often we react by turning away from difficulties, turning it into anger, frustration, or distracting ourselves from it, or shutting down, denying, going into fix-it mode. Denying is a big one. Denial is a huge way that we relate to the suffering in our lives. For example, people that don't want to go to a doctor to get a diagnosis. A huge element of denial in that. So practice is, noticing when those things happen, when there's denial or those other distraction, anger, frustration, and seeing that there's another way, a way of being in non-contention with the moment. So what does non-contention with the moment mean? Some people think that maybe just a mental recognition of what's happening in each moment is enough. But it's more than that. It's also penetrating. The Buddha used the word penetrating. So there is a recognition, but there's also a penetrating understanding that comes out of that. The seeing that there's that it's impersonal, for example, that it's just arising without your consent. I think I use that phrase in the meditation. It's arising automatically, spontaneously, without your consent. So those thoughts, even the stories, arise, right, without your consent. So there is that recognition, but they're seeing the impersonal nature of it. Also seeing the transitory nature of it, that's impermanent. The stories are just thoughts. They arise, they fade. They only stick around if you grab onto them, believe them, and pursue them. I can't tell you how many thoughts came into my mind about the air mattress. They're just like bubbles. This thought. I wonder if it's the dog. The first time we've had the dog sleeping. And I really do think it was the dog. I'll blame the dog, right? Because it's and he's got sharp claws. And it was down at his end of the bed. But so, the thoughts of, I wonder if this, they're just like boom, boom, pop, bubble, 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 all just spontaneously arising. But there's no need to pursue, to believe, to grab onto any of those thoughts. So not getting lost in the content of our minds. So when we practice this, our meditation, where we're just being with whatever arises, that's just practice for then bringing that into our lives, where we can be with whatever arises. Because if we're sitting there in meditation and something comes up, and we think, "Oh, that shouldn't be there." There's contention with the moment. I shouldn't have an active mind. I should be calm when I meditate. I shouldn't be fidgety. I shouldn't be, I don't know, what else happens when we meditate? Pretty much anything, right? I shouldn't have this pain in the knee. So what I'm saying is the practice is just being okay with all that. So being willing to feel the ouch in our lives, the felt sense of it. So you can feel into what these things are like when they arise in your meditation. Of course, we have the instruction too that, if you get distracted and lost in a train of thought, you can come back to the breath and ground yourself, come home, back to home base. And that's just bringing you back to your being, because it's from that sense of being that you can observe and be with that whole show, right? If you're lost in thought, you're really not conscious of anything. You're just being led around like a puppy dog by these trains of thoughts. So that's the idea of that, is you're coming back to your being, that silent space of awareness where that context within which all that content is just happening. And I think what you start to notice is that context, that still awareness, it never changes. It doesn't matter what's arising in it. It's the same, still awareness. It can be intense grief, there can be pain, there can be trauma, there can be, I'm giving extreme examples because absolutely anything can arise within that still awareness, and it's unchanged. Like we use the sky as an analogy. The sky is unaffected by whatever passes through it, whether it be blue sky or rain clouds, thunderstorms, severe lightning. We've had a bit of that lately, the severe lightning part in Ottawa. The sky is unaffected by it. It's just the sky remains the sky. We can, so it's more than just a mental recognition. We're going into the felt sense of it, the specific qualities of it, the impersonal nature of it. So there is this investigation that happens. The acronym RAIN that many of you may have heard, that's been around for many years. Michelle McDonald coined it, I don't know, 30 or 40 years ago. And Tara Brach has really popularized it in the last 10 or so years. RAIN. So RAIN, the acronym is R for recognize. So first you have to be conscious and recognize what's arising. The second is accept. So that's the non-contentious part. So that's the mental recognition of what's happening in the moment. The third is investigate. This is where you start to see and clearly understand its nature, its spontaneously arising, its impersonal nature, its selfless nature, its temporary, transitory nature. You can really start to see those truths about it. And the end is, is either non-identify or nurture, depending on which teacher is teaching the acronym. Michelle McDonald called it non-identify, and Tara Brach refers to it as nurture. Both are beautiful teachings. There should be two ends, perhaps, in the word RAIN. Non-identify is a feature of the investigation, right? But the nurture brings in that self-compassion component. And that self-compassion component is crucial as well, because sometimes we open to an experience and it's overwhelming. So there's the teaching is also, there's the skillfulness of how to relate to what's arising. We can back off in that moment. It's not distracting ourselves to bury it, but kind of backing off to come back to it another day. And I've spoken about this aspect of bringing self-compassion So you don't have to, the instruction isn't to, just kind of dive into everything that arises with, hell bent on, not maybe the wrong word, but bent on seeing this and understanding it. So at times it's skillful to save it for another day, if it's particularly if it's overwhelming. And this clear seeing doesn't get rid of all the difficulties in your life and in the world. It just it's awakening to the true nature of our life and freeing in the sense that we're not yanked around unconsciously by what's arising. I mean, look at the life of the Buddha. After his awakening, he spent 45 years teaching. And he had the thought not to teach. Sitting under the tree, as the story goes, he had the thought that nobody's going to get this. This is too subtle, too profound. Then he had the thought, well, there's some people with a little dust in their eyes, as he phrases it. And the choice arose that he was going to teach. He was going to tune into the lives of the people around him and teach what he had discovered. So his clear seeing led him to compassion, which then led him to, witness the suffering of the people around him, where he walked to, and to give teachings to help alleviate or end that suffering. But he didn't, just get rid of all this. People in his family suffered. He had family members that went to war over water resources. There's a lot of suffering still in the world and in his world and around him. So this doesn't get rid of all the injustices in the world and all the pain. It's a way of, when we say the end of suffering, it's the end of us creating all this extra suffering. I'll give you a little hint. So the second, in that story of the air mattress deflating, the second way of relating was how Vida related. So she's been practicing for a while, and she saw the stories, and she wanted to get rid of them, and so she started using different techniques to try and get rid. And this is what she basically told me. She was trying to get rid of the story. So she as she told it, she says, "Oh yeah, there was a sense of aversion to what was arising in that moment." And I said, "So, of the suffering that you experienced, because she experienced a fair bit over the course of the evening, how much it was due to sleeping on the ground, and how much of it was due to what was created and fabricated in the mind, in your mind?" And she thought about it, and she said, probably about 90-10. 10% from sleeping on the ground and 90% of all the stories that were spun about it. And that's amazing. So that's really what the Buddha's pointing. He's pointing to that 90%. The 10% is going to happen anyway. It's that 90%. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional, I guess, is this the slogan that you might remember. And that slogan might be helpful to just repeat when the mind starts spinning. 10%. 10%, that's the human part, being human. Actually, the 90% is being human too, because that's what our minds do, but we can see through that. We can see it for what it is. But that's part of being human too. I said to her, well, the whole thing is part of human existence. But the 90%, if you see its true nature, doesn't have to be followed. That 90% is the optional. It's the self-created, created by these human minds. Created by these human minds. But that too is a manifestation. Even that. So maybe she sees that, and the next time there's a shift. So by seeing suffering, by seeing how we create suffering, there can be a shift. So the next time I go, I've been down this road. I know. I see you, Mara, as the Buddha said, as he was tempted with all kinds of thoughts under the Bodhi tree. Even the Buddha awakening, he had all that stuff come up, right? It's not like he just sat there, went into bliss and tranquility, and then became awakened. He had all this avalanche of thoughts that came up, and but they were recognized and seen for what they were, the true nature. I think I brought that up as a way, perhaps a thing to say to yourself especially when there's an avalanche of them. I see you, Mara. I see this, and Mara is just a symbol for, the mind's creation of dukkha. So I'll open it up there for any questions. I didn't get to the third bit, the knowing that you know part, but we'll see what we can weave in for next week. Any questions about that talk or anything else in your practice that's come up?
So this week I had an opportunity to practice some of this. I had a kind of something happen that caused me some quite considerable physical discomfort for a couple of days, and so when I did I did the body scan in this case. One day there was a release, and I felt better physically, and it gave me mental kind of mental relief. And the next day when I tried it, I was struggling, and I couldn't get as comfortable, and wasn't able to, and even though then the thought came out that you're not supposed to have an expectation, it's just, I'm just trying to, see what's happening and practice being with it, and this is an opportunity for that, to live in the moment. When you're suffering, it is hard not to cling to release, and so how does one ever get there? This is the question.
Yeah, the egoic mind really wants to know how it can end what it's creating. Right? And that's so true. That's what the ego will want, the answer to how to. It's a process of seeing. Maybe when I had pretty intense head pain with my concussion, and went through a real process of practice with it, and it when I look back at how tenacious the egoic mind was in sort of tricking me into tricking the, so accepting it will make it go away. Like, you just hear what's under that, the egoic mind. If you accept it, it'll go away. Well, in that phrase is the very aversion, you're wanting it to go away. So there isn't acceptance. So I'm going to really accept it without wanting it to go away. And then it'll go away. So there's all these layers of, and you can see how this is just a sinkhole of mind games, really, right? Think of all the different ways you can convince the egoic mind can spin this so that it'll make it go away, but it's all very spiritual and it's all very insight meditation like, but it's ultimately you want this to go away. And that's our survival. We want to feel good. We want to be happy. I mean, that's pretty much what motivates everything we do is seeking happiness. So, yeah, you see those stories being spun over in every which way. And what happened to me and what I hear so many other people also speak about is a surrender. In other words, an exhaustion of trying to do anything, right? In a sense, it comes as a kind of a grace almost, a spontaneous arising. It's not something you kind of create. It's just as you just keep seeing. I mean, the practice is to see, just keep seeing that the suffering still being created no matter how you spin the story. It exhausts itself. And then there's just like, okay, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing but to just be. And that's the moment of surrender. I don't know what to do. The ego and it's exhausted. Everything's exhausted to the point of just surrender. And in that moment of surrender, and things just are. What happened with me is then the egoic mind jumped in and said, "Now you've got it. You just surrender and it'll go away." So even that got grabbed by the egoic mind as a way to fix it. So then the process kind of churns a little more. It's not like I was back at square one and I had to go through, the months of, but it was like back into that kind of storytelling mode and then surrender. And, so it was a few times of surrendering to it. So if that's helpful at all, but it comes from a process of just seeing over and over and over. And it happens, it's kind of like a fruit ripening on a tree. The fruit's not going to fall off the tree until it's ripe. And it's really kind of that process of the fruit ripening, and you're just seeing and seeing. The fruit ripens, you're seeing, and at some point it just falls off, and there's surrender. And the mind may or may not jump in at that point. It's that can be different for everybody. Some people are so exhausted that the mind doesn't even come, but there's just like a peacefulness with what is there, an acceptance with that this is what's happening. In my case, the mind came in and blah, 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 blah. I had a couple more weeks of, yak, and storytelling and so on. But that, and then, you can look back at these kinds of deep sufferings and they're really, huge graces it's how we relate to our biggest difficulties, really, that brings about the deepest transformation.
Stephen, I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on one of the instructions you gave during the meditation, which was, I think, something along the lines of try to let go of the sense of being the meditator. And I've been trying to figure out what that means practically. I do get some sort of sense of that at times if I'm focused more on awareness, and I can sort of sometimes move to a place where I sort of almost see myself, I'm observing myself meditating. So that can kind of happen. But a lot of this meditation was focused on direct experience, felt sense, what's going on in the body. And when I'm doing that, I suppose I can sometimes sort of see, okay, this is just a temporary kind of thing that exists and it's not really my true nature. But all of that sort of body-based stuff and felt sense seems to take me, in any event, back to a feeling of being the meditator. So I'm not sure practically what the instruction meant or how to work with that. So if you could elaborate, that would be appreciated.
Okay. Yeah, that's an instruction that you can engage with during any meditation. Perhaps a 35-minute meditation is a bit short to, to get to the sort of the point of letting go, because you're letting it's the kind of last subtle level of letting go, because you're letting go of identification with the content of what's arising as you see it for what it is, the impersonal nature. You're seeing that you're non-identifying with the content, and you're resting in that still awareness, spirit, divine, whatever you want to call it, Buddha nature. So there is no meditator. There's simply stillness, awareness, seeing content. And that is, yeah, I think I said to see if you can let go. Ask yourself silently, can I let go just a little more? Can I let go of even of being the meditator? So you're not meditating. Meditating is just happening. You sit down and meditation unfolds. So if you think you're meditating, you're still grasping, hanging on to that identification as someone who's doing something here. But if you let go of that subtle letting go of that sense, and there's just stillness, awareness, seeing the content that's arising, that's just meditation unfolding. There's no identification with anything that's unfolding. Why would there be? It's only spontaneously arising without your consent. What are you doing? Really, what are you doing? Nothing. It's just there's awareness, aware that there's stuff spontaneously arising. And you think you're doing it all, so it's, or maybe, I don't know. Some of us think we're doing it all. When I say you, I don't mean you specifically, Alan. I just mean we think we're doing it all in so many cases, don't we? you notice that we, if you have a good meditation, it's like, wow, I did a really good, I must be getting this. I did a good meditation there. Or have a bad meditation. Oh crap, I'm not getting this. There's something wrong with me because I'm not meditating right or something. I need to go to that Thursday night side. I missed a Thursday night. Now I'm totally fucked up. I don't get this at all. so it's all about, we're totally identified. So that's what I'm pointing to, is it's letting go of that, of the sense that you've any letting go of your agendas. Sometimes I start with that, letting go of any sense of an agenda of what might happen during the meditation. You just, like the Zen Buddhists talk about just sitting. Yeah, just sitting and seeing. But then you say, well, am I seeing? Well, no, seeing is just happening. Yeah. But that is because that is a very helpful teaching in so many ways, because it's because we can really get in the way of our meditations in so many ways. We could create suffering by thinking we're screwing it up, right? And we can also waste a lot of time, messing around with our meditations. It doesn't mean we don't tinker here and there and try different techniques. I mean, as a teacher, it's constantly what I do is I give people techniques that I hope will help them see this. But there is a sense that, I'm here as a teacher giving you a technique, or, tell someone to follow their breath and their mind wander. You think you're doing all that then, right? But this is just a part of a process to eventually seeing through that. In a sense, true meditation, you're doing absolutely nothing. You're just sitting. And I'm not saying all those traditional techniques are useless. They play a very important role in our practice, in our working through processes in our practice. But ultimately, it can create the false sense that we're in control of our meditation.
So my thing is not, I don't know if it's a question, I don't know what it is. It's a thinking through something, and it pertains to what you said earlier. Very early in your talk, you said something about the thought, or at least that's how my mind received it. And that's what acceptance, it's to do with this idea of aversion and acceptance. So I'll just in my thing. So I'm triggered by something, and I am so pleased with myself because I've discovered to what extent a certain situation triggers me. And I've been working, look, I accept it. And I thought, good, and yes, there was that element of, now it's going to be less powerful because I'm working on all this acceptance. So, okay, so that's a suffering. Okay, so this thing triggers me and I suffer and I'm trying to accept it. Okay, so then my next thought, which I think is a new suffering, is I despise myself for having that. Even though I'm accepting it, I wish I didn't have it. I'm bad for having it. Blah blah blah. All the spin-offs. Like, is that a new suffering, or is that indicating that actually haven't actually accepted the situation. Is that clear?
Does it feel like suffering?
Oh yeah, so the first thing, the accepting, oh yeah, look at me being bothered by that.
No, but the last thought about you're not
Then yeah, the second thing is, oh, I'm bad to be
still having.
having,
Does
yeah,
that
yeah.
feel like?
Oh yeah. In fact, to be honest, it feels like more suffering than the first thing. So that's like a new and independent thing is how I'm going to take it. And that's what I need to accept, is that I don't like it. Okay, I thanks. If you care to comment, I'd be delighted.
Yeah, we if it feels like suffering, it probably is, and 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 if we're yeah, we can beat ourselves up for believing the thought about the event, right? So the event happens, the thought arises, the thought is just nothing, right? The thought's just a it's nothing until we give it some power. We believe it, that creates more suffering. So there's a bunch of things that have happened in that. Then another thought comes up saying, oh crap, I've been practicing all this time and I'm still believing my damn thoughts about these events. Like, what the hell's the matter with me? There's another, papancha or proliferation that's happening there. And then if that thought is believed, again, that thought is just a thought still. That thought is just as ephemeral as your original thought. It's still just a thought. But if it's believed, a whole bunch of more suffering happens. And this can spin out for quite some time. So notice when there's a believed thought. So a thought can arise. A thought has absolutely no power, no juice. It's about as real as a raindrop, about as powerful as a raindrop, in terms of shifting you or shifting your mood, right? The thought is just that, just a thought. Notice when it's a believed thought, what happens. That's when the suffering kicks in. So nothing, thoughts are just, so that's just take that as a practice. Oh, there's a thought. There's a thought. I see you. Just seeing the thought. And then if suddenly you go, if it starts to cause a bit of a contraction, it's becoming a believed thought. You'll feel it in the body first, actually. If you're really conscious of the thought, you'll start to feel a contraction, but you'll see the thought, you'll feel a contraction in the body. Sometimes the heart, the neck, you feel this contraction. It'll become a believed thought. And then the next sort of suffering will arise. So it's that phase of the thought being believed or just being seen. So again, the thought is not there's no problem with the thought. It's you believing the thought that creates the suffering. And again, if there's self-judgment, you could bring some compassion to that as well. That this is again part of being a human being. These thoughts arise. They're sometimes they're believed, and sometimes this creates suffering. And just bring a sense of compassion to that. That this is a part of our common humanity, that we all experience this. Until we're Buddhas. So it's part of a sharing. So many of us think that we're the only ones that do this, or that we do it so often. We must do this way more than everybody else. And I think, you know, having spiritual friends is so helpful because you can actually start to see that everybody does this. Everybody does this. They believe their thoughts, they create suffering, then they judge themselves for having created the suffering. It's just what we do. It's part of our shared humanity, human experience. So, you know, we can ease up on the bring some self-compassion to that. And you know what? I had to bring a sense of humor to it. I remember years in my practice, I was you know, I had to actually start to see it over and over and actually start to laugh a little. Like, really? Really? Again? You know, you're going to do this again? But this is funny. It's like, how absurd that this could happen. I've seen it and it still happens, you know. One has to sort of bring, sometimes a sense of humor can help as well. Self-compassion and a sense of humor and humility. Yeah.
I just wanted to share that to you, it might seem like you're always saying the same things, but to me, even though I know I've heard some of these things, it's always incredibly fresh and exciting. And I have a couple of books that I turn to, and they're not long, and I've read them over and over the years, and yet something will happen and I'll crack open one of these books and I'll read something and it's like I've never heard it before. It's so fresh, and you can just, I don't know how to describe it. It makes me laugh because I think, how could I not get this stuff? I've read it so many times, but then it comes up again and it's like, wow, this is amazing. So it never gets repetitive for me. Thanks.
I remember going to one of my early teachers, Gregory Kramer, and he would say something, and I'd sort of, it would just penetrate, right? It was just it was the right thing said at the right time for the right situation, and that's when the teachings penetrate. And I would penetrate, and I'd say, Gregory, why didn't you tell me this before? And he would laugh. He'd say, I've said this to you at least 100 times, right? So we do repeat ourselves, but the different teachings penetrate depending on where we're at different times, right? So that's the sort of part of this. And that's why I say when you listen to a talk, is just kind of let the words wash over you as opposed to needing to sort of figure it out, and what needs to be received will be received, right? Other people will receive different things. There's a lot of things are said, stuff just kind of, you know, flows out of this mouth, and so it resonates at different levels with different people, different times. So, but it does feel like, you know, sometimes I feel like I'm repeating myself. Yeah. Part of this being a teacher in insight meditation, from what I'm told.
I ditto DJ. Thank you for saying that.
But you know, don't worry, I'm not judging myself for it.
Yes, please walk the talk.
So this next week, I would, as practices, I would invite you to, well, part of this, of course, is being continuously conscious, right? Because so noticing when you're not conscious of what's happening moment by moment is kind of the baseline for any of this. Because if we're on autopilot, so to speak, then we can't see, because we're just being pulled or jerked around. I mean, eventually you may feel like that jolt of suffering, the big contraction, consciousness will arise. So just this kind of continuous consciousness of what's arising moment by moment, and then seeing what each moment, because pleasant and unpleasant arises, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral arises, like, I don't know, it must be a billion times a day. It's like you've got a billion moments or so. I mean, I haven't counted them, but there's lots of them. Like every moment, there's a sense of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and just seeing how what's arising in relation to that. Is there aversion? Is there a grasping? Is there what's what thoughts is the mind churning up regarding that? Just kind of keying into those aspects of your experience. Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Then how am I relating to pleasant, unpleasant, neutral? Be on the lookout for those deflating air mattress moments too, because those can be really revealing, right? Can something that is difficult arise? Can it just be held as difficulty arising? And if thoughts about it arise, can those thoughts just be seen as thoughts about difficult moment arising? So in a sense, you're letting go, like I was talking about letting go of the meditator, you're letting go of the doer and all this, and you're just seeing it all from the sense of still awareness, from a place of being, letting go of the doer. So that's the practice for the week. See how it resonates with you. And next week, I don't know, we'll either move on to the second noble truth, or we might look, we should look at knowing that because that's the one that we leave out the most in our practice. We keep having the same insights over and over again. And the reason we do that is because we don't integrate the insight into our lives. So I'll talk a bit about that at a general level as well, how important it is to notice insights and to then integrate them in our lives, because you're having insights all the time as well. Insights aren't these things that only happen to gurus and just people that have been practicing for 100 years. They're things that happen to anybody that's meditating and listening to, coming to talks like this. Inevitably, the insights are arising. They're not as obtuse or obscure as many people think. So I'll talk about what an insight is and how we can integrate those and see them, and then how we can integrate those into our lives. Yeah. Sound like fun? It is the fun part, really. It's kind of where you can see changes and benefits and transformation occurring, right? When you start to integrate these teachings. Yeah. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy your week and take good care. Bye.
Everyone.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen.
Have a good night.
You're welcome.